For more on this, let's bring in Kyle Seraphin, former FBI agent, host of the Kyle Seraphin Podcast, and he joins us on the phone now. Kyle, good to have you back with us, sir.
Hey, Vince. You know what? I was following your sickness. I'm glad to hear that you're well now.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I feel a lot better. Thank goodness.
I went into strep throat right when you were coming out, so that was pretty wild. I
really?
Was like, oh God, I hope I don't have abscesses.
Well, I hope you're feeling better too. I'm appreciative that you're here, Kyle, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this subject. You have Merrick Garland being held in contempt of Congress. The claim is that they just can't release this audio. It would have a chilling effect on future investigations. But that seems like poppycock, given that we've seen the transcript. So unless the audio is different, what are you hiding?
Yeah, for me, it kind of reminds me of that movie Liar Liar with Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
And he says, "Objection, Your Honor." And the guy says, "Well, what's your objection?" He says, "It totally ruins my case." It's like, that's why, because it's just going to make Biden sound like a fool. Look, we have a pretty bad track record of seeing attorney generals being held to account when they're held in contempt of Congress, if people remember what happened with Eric Holder.
Yes.
So this is a ceremonial movement. You know, it's good that they united enough to be able to get the vote in. But at the end of the day, is it going to have any impact? No. And should they disclose the transcript? They already waived the privilege. They gave the transcript. So in theory, unless there's a differentiation between the audio and the written, why on earth would you hide it? It's foolishness. Like I said, I can't believe he was a USA.
And they keep making it sound like, well, this would have an impact on every other investigation everywhere. No, the circumstances here are pretty unique. This is the President of the United States. He's alleged to have stolen classified documents over the course of a long political career. And there was a special counsel investigation into that matter. Robert Hur concluded the guy doesn't deserve charges because his brain doesn't work. And they released a written transcript of their conversation. This case is pretty unique. Normally, you don't get any evidence out of the Justice Department in any case that they don't charge. Here you have, again, the transcript out. Why not just release the audio?
Yeah, it seems totally absurd. The upside is we're in the middle of a campaign season, and all those things are about contrast, right? So we've got the contrast of one guy is going to be held accountable. He was indicted. The other guy is not. The situation for Donald Trump seems much more defensible, the fact that he was the commander-in-chief. And the other guy was a congressman or a senator for a long time and then a vice president and held on to things. And they kind of have a very similar fact patterns. They were negotiating it. One got a consent raid, one got a search warrant. So we're seeing the contrast. America gets to see the contrast. And then we get to see this weird sort of double standard where you can read what we said it says, but you can't hear what we actually recorded. It doesn't work in most court filings. You can't say we're going to keep the recording that we have, but we're going to give you a transcript in discovery. Like I said, once again, a really weird move. A guy who used to be a federal prosecutor. You'd think he understood fairness better.
Merrick Garland has declared himself immune from prosecution, to your point that there won't be any meaningful consequence for him. The Hill had a piece yesterday on this subject. DOJ memo says Garland can't be prosecuted for contempt over Biden-Hur audio. So I guess there are categories of people who are above the law.
That's 100% correct. Look, when we see these things where the government investigates the government and finds the government was blameless in the thing that the government was trying to find out, like it's this circular, self-licking ice cream cone. People in D.C. are familiar with this sort of two-step, this little game that they play. And this is another reason why having an Office of Inspector General or having an internal affairs organization that is going to theoretically suss out the reality of it, it can't hold the people that it actually works for accountable. How are you going to get people that are in an Office of Inspector General if they actually have to answer for prosecution? They can't bring prosecution on their own. So we keep seeing OIG reports from all kinds of different things, whether they be whistleblowers or otherwise,
right,
saying, look, we got a real problem here, and then we're going to refer it for prosecution, but it's going to look really bad for Merrick Garland. And I'll just tell you something, Vince, that's kind of funny for me. My original whistleblower claim that I brought forward was that Merrick Garland may have lied to Congress under oath. And this was specifically about whether he was going to use counterterrorism resources against parents at school board meetings. I didn't say you couldn't do that. I'm saying that he said he wasn't going to do it, and then we got a memo saying they would. And when I brought it forward, it's not shocking that DOJ didn't go after their own boss, but that's kind of why we have a problem right now. There's nobody that has functional oversight, and they know it, which is they just act like it doesn't matter. They're just going to shrug it off.
So Congress should defund them. That's the answer. I mean, really, that's the only thing that's left.
We've theoretically got a co-equal branch of government that has one ability. It's the power of the purse, and they keep funding the executive agencies that keep proving that they don't care about oversight.
They're giving the FBI a brand new building. They're ready to sign off on all sorts of goodies.
Yeah, it's $11.3 billion in the proposed budget. That's a lot of money, and the argument should be made is, what are you doing for us with that money? And are you listening to what we're asking? I've got an active FOIA case right now. I'll just kind of tell you this as a kind of an inside baseball, but we know that the Office of General Counsel at the FBI did a presentation to members at the Hoover Building that basically lampooned Republicans and was very disrespectful to Republican members of Congress. They had 7 different presenters that were all attorneys for the FBI's OGC. They all were kind of talking out of turn, and one of the witnesses reported to me that it looked like no adult had reviewed the presentation. We asked for the FBI to give it to us through FOIA. They've just given us our first 90 seconds of it. They redacted almost all of it, and they said, look, we can't give it to you, probably because it's really embarrassing and it makes them look ridiculous.
Yeah, well, embarrassing is not a reason under the law to preclude this information from being shared, but of course it is what they do in practice. They redact things for that reason specifically. I have one other question for you. You mentioned about the counterterrorism resources in the FBI, and something that popped up this week that I think matters a great deal is this story of all of the people from Tajikistan who were picked up by the FBI this past week here in the United States and turned over to ICE custody. The idea is that they are linked to ISIS-K, and I can't help but think about what the National Security Division at the FBI is supposed to be doing, which is again picking up terrorists. And instead, what they have been doing, which is picking up January 6 protesters ever since. Is that an issue? I mean, is this? Some people claim that they can walk and chew gum at the same time. It seems like a massive distraction of important resources to be focused on January 6th deal.
No, you're very astute with that, right? So there's an opportunity cost. You only have a finite amount of agents. They have a finite amount of hours in the day. And if they decide to go after nonviolent, people who are at a protest or a riot, and got rowdy on one day in history and haven't gotten rowdy since then we're not going to be able to look into the 100,000 Afghan parolees that we brought into this country completely unvetted, many of whom simply walked off the bases that they were staying on, Air Force and Army. And we were getting reports of it in real time when I was doing that work out in New Mexico for the FBI. It's like, where do those people go? They're just gone. What do you mean they're gone? They walked out to the road, they got an Uber, and they're off into the ether. So we brought in 100,000 people that way. Who knows who many of them were? And then we have a ton of people coming in over the border at a rate that is too difficult for us to even fathom in normal human spectrum. So what are those people doing? Yeah, we're going to go after the easy fruit. Look, I remember being in the FBI Academy, and one of the most disappointing things that was ever said is, we only catch the dumb ones. And that means they're going to go after the low-hanging fruit because it's a government job, and they're going to go after the easiest thing. It's actually really hard to get into terrorist networks. Doesn't mean there's not some people dedicated to it, but it's a lot easier to make your statistical accomplishments and keep your job in your file review by going after light lifts like January 6th. And there's a lot of money in it too. So they're more than happy to keep the budget fulfilled with those cases instead of waiting. We've got a ticking time on our hands. Like I said, between 100,000 Afghans and the millions that came over the border, you think there's not going to be some bad actors in there going to meet up and do some bad things in the next, 12 to 18 months? I'll be shocked. I'm actually shocked it hasn't happened worse yet.
It keeps happening.
And we're already seeing some of these penetrations going on at even Quantico, right? We saw some Jordanians get picked up that were trying to get through the gate. So there are penetration tests that are going on, trying to see what security looks like. You do it unarmed first. That's how you do your recon. There's no major crime there. And then you find out, you send the real bad guys in when they figured out what the situation looks like. So I hope they're on it, but it doesn't look like they are. Yeah,
a lot of problems and a lot of threats out there. Let me get back to Merrick Garland with you for a moment. There's a piece in the Washington Post this week written, under Merrick Garland's byline. The headline is "Unfounded Attacks on the Justice Department Must End." In the piece, he claims that there are all sorts of conspiracy theories and unfair attacks being leveled against the Justice Department. And rather than the Justice Department leading to a collapse in faith in our institutions, instead, it's the critics of the Justice Department, like you, Kyle Seraphin, who are making things worse. What do you make of this claim by Merrick Garland?
I love it. It's my favorite. I love it when these guys do this kind of stuff. I'm not sure that he wrote the piece or if he got some underling to write it, but yeah, it's perfect. It's like you can't criticize us. These are sort of unfalsifiable premises that the Democrats love to deal in, which is like, if you gave us enough power, we could solve the problem. And if we didn't solve the problem, it's because you didn't give us enough power. In the same way, it's like, you can't criticize us because you won't be able to do our jobs. That's not really what the government's designed to do. They've lost the concept. The thread of serving the people apparently is gone. Now the government serves the government's interests, and particularly people that are in political office like Merrick Garland, they serve Merrick Garland's interests. And how dare you? Who are you to criticize him? He's the guy out there serving and has a protected detail of a dozen FBI agents and flies around in a private jet. So how dare you? It's one of the problems, I think, of giving these people all these perks for these jobs. They actually start thinking they're a lot better than you when they're just regular people.
Yeah.
And no one elected him to anything. Let's be real.
So in this, he claims the following. He says that there are false claims that the department is politicizing its work to somehow influence the outcome of an election. Such claims are often made by those who are themselves attempting to politicize the department's work to influence the outcome of an election. So when you hear Merrick Garland claim that, no, we're not politicizing our work, what's your reaction?
It's a lot like when someone says that we're unbiased journalists because we just tell you the facts. But what we always have to look a little bit deeper, the second layer is editorial bias. So you see the bias of what is prosecuted and what is not prosecuted. Really simple example of it, like the FACE Act. It's almost never prosecuted against people that are destroying churches or doing things in faith communities. It's always prosecuted about people who are praying outside of abortion clinics.
Yes.
So you go, is that political prosecution? We have the discretion to make the best case. You do, but we can see what you're doing when it's 125-4. It's very, very lopsided and one-sided. So they have this bias, and it looks, to somebody that wants to back them up like it's fair. It's only fair skin deep the minute you get into that sort of editorial bias, that selectivity of how we're going to do it. And when they talked about elections specifically, DOJ has been straightforward. They said we are not interested in election fraud. We're only interested in voter suppression. So when they're only interested in certain types of crimes that relate to elections and not others, they are doing that kind of bias. And they can act like it's not for all they want, but we know what they're doing.
Right, yeah, and they're bringing, of course, Jack Smith is trying to sprint all of these cases he's bringing against Trump before the election for a very explicit purpose. He's trying to influence the outcome of that election. And what you just referenced, I'm glad you brought up the media because it makes me think, this has been my career, your career in the FBI, my career in media. In journalism, we refer to what you just said as selection bias. That is the stories that you choose to report on. You may report on that particular story in a fair way. You may call everybody who's involved in it, but you chose to focus on that story to emphasize it to the audience for a reason. The Justice Department does the same thing. They have selection bias about the types of cases they actually take up.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of daylight right now between what the government narrative is and the the mainstream media narrative looks like when you've got op-eds being published ahead of a contempt vote, right? And then they're out there doing cover for the guy that works. Whatever happened to democracy dies in darkness and we hold the powerful to account? Like, that's not there anymore. So it's all about, do they have access to the people they want? Are they going to get the bylines they want? Are they going to get the sourcing they want? And you're spot on. Like, they're making decisions by what they cover and what they prosecute. We can all see them, though. That's the upside of the internet and mass media.
Yeah, and so the media and the FBI, unfortunately, working hand in glove to take down the powerless rather than to hold the powerful to account. Kyle Seraphin, thank you very much for your time, as always. Really appreciate your wisdom on this subject and so many other things as well. You can find Kyle at the Kyle Seraphin Podcast as well. Kyle, thank you very much, sir.